the night all the time, but I'm sure it does more than most. Alex Cross, I answered. There was a click, then 2 short beeps. That meant a secure line of some kind. Whose line? Detective Cross, this is Betty Chow with the CIA Directorate of Intelligence. I'm very sorry for the hour, but I'm calling to ask you to come to a meeting out here at the Counterterrorism Center in Langley. That woke me right up. What had happened now? And what was the CIA suddenly doing in the mix? For that matter, what was I doing in it? Can you tell me what this is regarding? I asked while wiping the sleep from my eyes. That would help. I'm not at liberty to discuss any details, but you'll be fully briefed at the center, she said. I looked at the clock. It was just after 4 a.m. When's the meeting? I asked. We're set to convene at 5:30, Detective. Can I tell them you'll be here? I didn't even know who Betty Chow meant by them. I'm on my way, I said. And Detective, I'm to stress that this is a classified matter and that you're not to tell anyone where you're going this morning under penalty of federal law. Of course, I told her, and hung up. I thought about calling Bree anyway. She was still on duty, working the graveyard shift these days, and might even have some idea about what had happened to initiate all this. But then I thought the situation through again. If I was getting secure calls from the CIA on classified matters, there was a good chance, a very good chance, they were already listening in on my line. I got dressed quickly and left the house in the dark. Figuratively and literally, in the dark. Chapter 35. The usually long drive to CIA headquarters in Langley took no time at all without traffic. What I got off the car radio was that 2 police officers had been killed sometime overnight at the Brynwood rail yard. Was that why I had been summoned to the CIA? Doubtful. I figured it must be something even worse. But what did they know that I didn't? I didn't like being on the wrong side of this mystery again. Bree, after so many nights on duty, would be exhausted when she got home and would wonder where I was. I missed her like crazy. That's a good thing, but sometimes it feels so bad. An escort met me inside the main entrance to the agency's complex. He took me up to one of the nicer conference rooms on the 6th floor where most of the 24 high-backed leather chairs were already taken. I recognized only a few people around the table. Ned Mahoney was one of them. He came right over and shook my hand. A little formal for Ned. Alex, it's good to see you, he said. I mean it. This has been about the craziest week of my life. I hadn't laid eyes on him since this roller coaster ride had started. Part of me still wanted to be pissed at him, but what was the point? Ned was a friend. Any idea what we're doing here? I asked him in a quiet voice. I'm not sure, but listen, he said. He turned me around so we were both facing a glass wall that looked out to guest parking and the rolling, deep green woods beyond. The sun was just coming up over the hills. I need to apologize for how this mess has gone down so far, Ned said. He spoke quietly, but still in that rapid-fire way of his. It wasn't my call, but I know that doesn't mean anything when you're at the shit end of the stick. Don't worry about it, I said. I do worry about it. I think you're a hell of a resource, Alex, and a friend, too. I don't want to lose either one. We okay? Just write me a nice check or something. Buy me a Philly cheesesteak and a beer. He smiled at that, and I guess we were already over the hump. Anyway, I'm glad you're here. I wasn't sure they'd listen to me, he said. About what? I asked. About bringing you into the loop. Before I could respond, a voice behind us was calling the meeting to order. Good morning, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Evan Stroud, head of the directorate here at the agency. Ned and I sat down at the far end of the table. I knew Stroud's face, but only from the news. He made a blip in the media when he started this job all of 4 weeks ago. If you're here, you've already been cleared by the heads of your respective organizations, he went on. Beyond that, everything we cover is for the eyes and ears of this group only. You'll find clearance credentials in the folders in front of you. You'll have to fill them out before you leave. Stroud made all the introductions himself. He impressed me by knowing everyone's name and title without notes. It was a complete alphabet soup in that room. CIA, FBI, NSA, MPD. There were counterterrorism analysts as well as reps from Secret Service and Homeland Security, and one exhausted-looking agent from the National Clandestine Service who had just arrived from Riyadh. When he was done, Stroud sat down and nodded to the analyst on his right. Let's begin, he said. We have a hell of a lot of material to cover this morning. I raised my eyebrows at Mahoney. This was a big meeting. Ned made a little circling gesture with his finger, mouthed the words, "In the loop," and then pointed at me. Yeah, I guess so. Chapter 36. At approximately 3 o'clock this morning, 2 D.C. Metro police officers were shot and killed at the Brentwood Rail Yard in Northeast Washington. The analyst started in. It wasn't any easier to hear about the murders a second time. Both officers had families. I didn't know them, but that didn't matter. When another officer goes down, we all feel it. An indeterminate number of suspects were on site, all of whom escaped. What we did find, however, was 20 pounds of Semtex explosives and 6 canisters of aerosolized sarin. The sarin had already been deposited in the air conditioning ducts of several Metro subway cars. My head was starting to buzz. That was a staggering amount of deadly material. A couple of pounds of Semtex can take down a high-rise, and sarin gas is a nightmare at any dosage. The professional decorum in the room began to break apart at that point. Several side conversations started up around the table, and the questions were flying all at once. "Are we any closer to knowing who's running this attack?" one of the NSA guys asked. He was bigger and louder than the rest of us. "Actually, yes," the analyst said. He looked across the table at his colleague from Riyadh. "You want to take that?" The man from Riyadh's name was Andrew Fatani. He was clearly running on fumes and needed a shave. His voice was disturbingly hoarse when he got up to speak. "Here's what I can tell you," Fatani said. "We now have credible intelligence on the existence of a fledgling independent terror organization based out of Saudi Arabia. Beyond that, we have several unconfirmed reports regarding the establishment of a multifunctional cell here in Washington, a very serious and deadly one, I'm afraid. They're well-financed and organized." It felt like half the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Nobody said a word now, just listened. Fatani went on. "Our liaison with the Istikbarat tells us they're aware of the group, but not of any criminal activity inside the kingdom itself. That said, we've been moving as many operatives as possible out of the embassy in Riyadh and into the southern part of the country, where we believe Al-Aila is training its people before sending them abroad, meaning here, the United States. That includes Washington for sure, possibly New York and Los Angeles as well." "Al-Aila?" Stroud repeated for him. "Right, sorry." He got a few grim, sympathetic smiles as he took a long swig of coffee. Al-Aila is the purported name of this organization. It translates as the family, which may or may not have something to do with the use of married couples at the operational level, the first analyst said. It could also just be a coincidence. "But I sincerely doubt it," Fatani said, half to himself. "Excuse me." Ned raised his hand. "Not to get too far ahead of ourselves here, but do we know anything about Al-Aila's larger objectives, current targets, future targets, ideology, anything like that? Anything useful to us on the ground?" Both analysts automatically looked to the head of the table. "No," Stroud answered for them. "Nothing at this time." It was less than subtle code for the fact that we'd reached a wall in terms of what they were prepared to tell us, at least on the topic of Al-Aila, the family. "But we do have one other important piece of intel to throw into the mix. This could be useful," Stroud added. "It's about Ethan and Zoe Coyle." Chapter 37. One of the assistant directors from the Bureau, Peter Lindley, took over now. "We've received a second package from Ethan and Zoe's presumed kidnapper," he said. "At a minimum, this is someone who has or has had access to the children since they were taken from the school grounds." Everything about this was news to me. 2 packages? What packages? I could tell I wasn't the only one playing catch-up at the table. Lots of frowns and head shaking around the room. "The first came to us several days ago," Lindley said. He pulled a pair of 8x10 photos out of his briefcase and started them around the table. "The little black case you'll see is known to belong to Zoe, and the note in the other photo was folded up inside." A respectful silence followed the pictures as they were passed around. When I saw what was in that note, I understood why. "There is no ransom. There will be no demands. The price, Mr. President, is knowing that you will never see your children again." You can't read something like that and not feel compassion for the victims, the kids, and their parents. I have an unfortunate tendency to take these things personally, as if my own family had been harmed. That's my strength. And my weakness. And yesterday we received these, Lindley said, passing around 2 more photos. They've already been DNA tested and matched to Ethan and Zoe, respectively. The new images were of a boy's white Oxford shirt and a pair of thick-soled red boots, the kind a girl like Zoe might wear to school. Any formal theories? Someone asked. Actually, I was going to ask Detective Cross for his take on all this, Lindley said. Everyone turned to look at me, probably in time to catch the surprise on my face. I know you've only been working around the edges so far, Lindley said. I don't mean to put you on the spot here. It's fine, I said. At least I knew why I'd been brought in now. I've done as much profiling for the FBI as anyone in Washington. The pictures were all passed back my way, and I looked at them as a set. First thoughts, I said. The note's unequivocal. No ransom, no demands, period. So then the next question. Why send the second package? Maybe just to string us along, one of the bureau wonks contributed the obvious. Flaunt an obvious advantage the kidnapper has. Hang it over our heads, show off. I think that's probably true, I said. But there's a personal element here that's directed at the president. He's the one named in the note. If someone wanted to make him suffer, the best way to do that would be to draw this search out for as long as possible. Go back a second, Stroud said. When you say this is personal, are you suggesting it's also an individual act? Is this one man's vendetta against the president? I thought about it before I answered, but my first impulse didn't change. If you want my best guess, I said, yes. That's what this feels like to me. But for the sake of argument, terrorism can be very personal too, even in the name of a larger cause. Especially in the name of a larger cause, Fatani said. Most of these shits take what they're doing very personally. They're willing, even eager to die, as we've already seen. Lindley started to move on, but I jumped back in when one other thing occurred to me. This is above my pay grade, but I'd also recommend keeping President Coyle out of the public eye if that's not already in the plan, I said. Why is that? Stroud asked, although I think he already knew the answer. If I'm right, it deprives the kidnapper, or kidnappers, of a primary motivation. Don't let them see the president dealing with this. That's probably what they want, to humble the United States president in front of a world audience. One of the Secret Service reps cleared his throat. The president and first lady are in a secure location, he said. We'll keep Detective Cross's recommendation under advisement, but any decisions about that kind of thing? Just then, a familiar voice came into the room from an unseen speaker. Excuse me, I'd like to say something. It was coming from the wall or the ceiling or maybe even the table itself. I couldn't tell. But there was no mistaking who it belonged to. President Coyle was there with us, and apparently he was ready to make a statement. Chapter 38. 2 wide screens flicked on, one at either end of the room. Suddenly, President Edward Coyle was there, sitting at a generic-looking desk with a set of plain blue drapes drawn behind him. For all I know, it was a set piece, a bit of theater meant to hide any clues about where he actually was at this time. Still, it gave me a chill. Probably did the same for everybody in the room. We have you, sir, Stroud said. Go ahead, we're here and we're listening. Coyle looked bone-tired and his face was drawn. There was a kind of sadness in his eyes I'd never seen before. I also got the impression he hadn't been planning on doing this, speaking to our group right now. Let me state the obvious first, he said. I have 2 separate and distinct obligations here. One is to Ethan and Zoe, and the other to this country. Right now, we don't seem to know how enmeshed these obligations might be. But I do know that by all indications and according to the best advice I can get, our capital city is under attack. The president was incredibly focused. I thought of the eye of a hurricane as I watched him. He was obviously a strong man, and it was no fluke that he had risen to this position. I'm not saying that we've reached some critical point at which a decision has to be made between my children and our nation's security. No, sir, not at all, Stroud cut in. The president immediately put up the flat of his hand to quash any discussion. I need to make one point very clearly, he went on. With all due respect to the opinions in the room, if I have to show my face to lead the country through this crisis, then that's exactly what I'm going to do. Sir, that's all.